The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal, and the sky was a dull crimson as the last survivors of humanity huddled in the abandoned military outpost, barely clinging to life. The world around them was silent, too silent for comfort. The once bustling metropolis had been reduced to rubble, the remnants of a civilization long gone. Yet the real threat had never been the aliens that ravaged their cities, or the war that had torn the planet apart. It was the unknown. The things that lurked in the shadows, waiting. "I can't hold them off for much longer," Lieutenant Julia Thorne said, her voice strained. Her hands gripped the old rifle as if it was the last lifeline to sanity, but even she could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down. Behind her, the dim light from the flickering overhead lamp cast long shadows on the walls. Commander Peter Halston, a grizzled veteran with a deep frown etched across his face, scanned the monitors that lined the walls. He was silent, his eyes dark pools of exhaustion. The last remnants of humanity had gathered in the outpost in hopes of finding sanctuary, but the alien forces were closing in. They'd heard the rumors, the whispers. The Earth was lost. The aliens, beasts that defied understanding, were hunting them down, wiping out all traces of human existence. "We can't let them win," Julia muttered under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. Peter turned toward her, his expression hardening. "We've got no choice but to fight." "But... Julia, look at the numbers. There are too many of them." Suddenly, the distant sound of heavy footsteps reverberated through the compound. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a sign that the alien forces were closing in, encircling them like a predator with its prey. Julia clenched her jaw. "We'll fight until the end," she replied firmly, despite the growing doubt gnawing at her insides. Peter stared at her, the weight of his own sorrow and determination reflecting in his eyes. Until the end, indeed. Before he could say more, the communications console hummed to life. A strange, crackling noise filled the room. Julia and Peter exchanged a confused glance. The last operational communication system was supposed to be dead. This was impossible. "Do you hear that?" Julia whispered. Peter nodded. He stepped closer to the console, his hand hovering over the controls. The static continued for a few moments, growing louder, then abruptly shifted into something more coherent. "Coordinates, coordinates, coordinates, 635042-37. It was barely audible, the voice warped by interference. But there was something unmistakably human in its tone. A mix of urgency and desperation. "Who is this?" Peter barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Who's out there?" The voice crackled again, and then the signal was clear enough to make out a few words. "Survival, hope, coordinates, planet, the key, you must go." The transmission cut off abruptly. The room fell silent again, leaving the survivors staring at each other in disbelief. "Did anyone else hear that?" Julia asked. Peter's brow furrowed. He pressed a few buttons, trying to re-establish contact. But the screen remained static, a broken message, just like everything else on this dying planet. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No, it's impossible. It doesn't make sense." A strange chill crept up Julia's spine. She had seen the worst of humanity's fall, fought battles she could never forget, and lived through horrors no one should endure. But this was something else. Something she couldn't explain. "We're running out of time," Julia said. "The aliens are almost here. We need a plan." Peter nodded, rubbing his face with a weary hand. "I don't know how, but those coordinates, we need to get to them. It could be humanity's last hope." Another shudder rocked the compound, and the sound of something massive crashing against the walls echoed through the halls. The aliens were here. They had arrived. The survivors had mere minutes, maybe even seconds, before their sanctuary would be overrun. Peter made a swift decision. "Gather the team. We're heading to those coordinates." It's our only shot. Julia nodded, moving quickly to rally the others. She was already formulating a plan in her mind, though she had no idea how they were going to survive what was about to come. But she had no other choice. None of them did. The survivors, only 8 in total, rushed through the hallways, grabbing what little gear they could. The outpost, a former military stronghold, was once a fortress. Now, it was just a shell of its former self. "Are you sure about this, Commander?" asked Sergeant Liam Monroe, his voice laced with skepticism as he checked his rifle for the umpteenth time. He was younger than Peter, eager but still green under pressure. "It's the only shot we have, Monroe," Peter replied. "We don't have the luxury of waiting around and hoping for a miracle. We take this chance or we die here." Monroe hesitated, but nodded. The others didn't speak, they knew the gravity of the situation. Their lives, their last breaths, might very well depend on whatever was waiting at those coordinates. They hurried to the transport bay, the old military vehicle that had once been a symbol of humanity's strength. Now, it was little more than a rusted, barely functional machine. But it would have to do. There was no other option. As they climbed into the vehicle, Julia glanced back at the outpost. She could already hear the guttural growls of the alien invaders as they breached the gates. Their dark figures were visible in the distance, moving like shadows through the thick smoke. It was only a matter of time before they reached them. "Stay sharp," Peter ordered. "Keep your eyes on the road. We need to move fast." The transport hummed to life, its engine sputtering and struggling, but it roared into motion. Heading toward the coordinates. The distant lights of the alien ships filled the sky like falling stars, marking the end of an era for the human race. As the vehicle rumbled across the war-torn landscape, the survivors remained silent. The destruction around them was beyond comprehension. The cities they had once known, places of innovation and culture, were now nothing more than craters and skeletal remains. Earth had lost its battle for survival, and humanity was now a dying echo of what it once was. But as they neared the coordinates, something unexpected happened. A strange, metallic hum filled the air. The survivors looked out the windows, their hearts racing as a massive structure appeared on the horizon. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before, a colossal ship, half buried in the dirt, with strange markings etched into its surface. The vehicle stopped, its engine sputtering to a halt just outside the structure. "Is this it?" Julia asked, her voice trembling. Peter didn't answer. Instead, he jumped out of the vehicle and walked toward the ship, his every step filled with purpose. The others followed, unsure of what awaited them, but driven by the need for answers. The ship's massive doors slowly creaked open as if it had been waiting for them. Inside, the air was cool, and the atmosphere felt wrong. They had crossed into something new, something ancient. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances as they stepped inside. And then, just as they crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate. The atmosphere was tense as the survivors stood at the entrance to the mysterious ship, its doors still ominously shut behind them. The glow of the strange object on the pedestal pulsed with an otherworldly energy, casting long, eerie shadows across the vast chamber. The voice that had spoken to them, a voice they could now hear clearly inside their heads, lingered in their minds, unsettling them with its cryptic warning. "Welcome to your salvation, or your doom." Peter, ever the leader, was the first to break the silence. His brow furrowed as he stepped cautiously forward, eyeing the glowing object warily. The others followed suit, their eyes scanning every inch of the dark, cavernous space. The ship felt ancient, yet oddly familiar. As if it had been waiting for them. Waiting for humanity. Julia was the second to step into the room. Her rifle was still slung over her shoulder, but her hand rested on it instinctively. She was a soldier first, always on guard, but this place, it felt different. Alien, yes, but also human. A strange contradiction she couldn't quite place. Do we touch it? Julia asked, breaking the silence again, her voice low and uncertain. Peter hesitated. He didn't know what to make of this. The signal that had guided them here was both a lifeline and a warning, and the last thing they needed was to activate something they couldn't control. No, he said finally. His voice steady but filled with resolve. We need to understand what we're dealing with first. Liam Monroe, the youngest of the survivors, stepped forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. What if this is it, Commander? What if this thing is the answer we've been searching for? Peter turned to face him, his eyes hard. If it's the answer, we'll know soon enough. But we're not taking chances. The air inside the ship felt cooler now, and the hum of energy seemed to be growing louder. A distant sound echoed through the chamber, a soft whirring that made the walls vibrate. The survivors tensed. Something was coming to life inside this ancient vessel. Peter gestured toward the back of the ship. Let's move. We need to see what else this place has to offer. Keep your eyes open. As they moved deeper into the ship, the survivors were struck by its vastness. What appeared to be a single room was actually a sprawling complex, filled with corridors that led to other chambers, each one filled with strange symbols and technology unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls were made of a material that seemed both metallic and organic, pulsating with a faint blue light. It was as if the ship itself was alive, breathing, waiting. We're not alone here, Julia muttered under her breath, glancing around at the strange alien architecture. The feeling of being watched was palpable. Liam, ever the skeptic, was the first to speak up. Maybe it's just the ship's systems. Whatever this place is, it's been here for a long time. It's bound to have some weird features. Peter gave him a pointed look but didn't respond. They had no time to debate what was real and what wasn't. If they wanted to survive, they had to keep moving forward. They entered what appeared to be the control room. The walls here were lined with screens, but they were unlike any technology the survivors had ever encountered. No buttons. No levers. Just smooth, glass-like surfaces that seemed to respond to their presence. As they approached, the screens flickered to life, displaying patterns, numbers, and symbols they couldn't understand. What is this? Julia whispered, stepping closer to one of the screens. The symbols danced across the surface, rearranging themselves in a way that almost seemed intentional. Peter glanced at her, his mind working furiously. This is where we'll find the answers. But as they began to examine the control room, something caught their attention, an image, a map, perhaps? It was an outline of a star system, dotted with numerous planets. Most were unmarked, but one stood out. The planet they had just arrived on. The map was intricate, detailed, far beyond the level of technology they had. The markers on the map glowed softly, each one pulsating as though alive. Do you see that? Liam said, his voice sharp with realization. This map, it's showing our solar system. But these other planets, they don't belong to us. Julia stepped forward, her heart racing. They can't be. These aren't stars we know. This is something else. A low rumble echoed through the ship as the map began to zoom in on one planet, a massive, barren rock that orbited a distant star. The ship's voice, the same one that had spoken to them earlier, echoed once more, this time clearer. Find the heart. Only then will the path be revealed. The survivors exchanged confused glances. Find the heart? Julia repeated, more to herself than anyone. What heart? Peter ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. This was it. This was the reason they had come here. The coordinates had led them to this ship, and now they were being told to find something on this planet, something important. We have no choice, Peter said finally. We need to search the planet. This could be humanity's last hope. With their new objective set, the survivors moved quickly to board the ship's small transport vehicle, which appeared to be a shuttle designed to take them to the surface. It was old, battered, but functional. As they buckled in, the ship's voice spoke again. "Be warned. The heart lies beneath the surface. It is not alone." The shuttle lurched forward, its engine sputtering to life as it launched them toward the planet below. The descent was rough. The planet's atmosphere was thick with clouds, making it difficult to see anything beneath them. As they broke through the clouds, the land below came into view, an expanse of rocky terrain, deep canyons, and jagged mountains. There were no signs of life, no vegetation, no animals. Just barren rock and dirt. Liam looked out the window. "This place is a dead zone." "No sign of alien forces," Julia said, scanning the horizon. "At least we're not walking into a trap. For now." As the shuttle touched down on the surface, the survivors disembarked, their boots crunching on the dry, lifeless ground. The air was thin, making each breath feel labored. The silence was overwhelming. Not a single bird, not a single sound, just the wind howling through the canyons. Peter led the way, checking his map. The coordinates pointed them toward a valley in the distance, one that looked far too symmetrical to be natural. There was something there, something hidden. "Let's move out," Peter said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. The trek to the valley was long and exhausting. The survivors moved cautiously, knowing that any wrong move could be their last. As they approached the valley, the terrain became even stranger. The rock formations around them were unnaturally straight, and the valley itself appeared to be perfectly shaped, as though it had been carved by intelligent hands. There was no doubt now, this place had been designed. When they reached the center of the valley, they found what they were looking for, a massive stone structure, half buried in the ground. It was ancient, covered in strange symbols and runes that glowed faintly. Under the light of the twin moons above, the structure seemed to pulse with an energy they couldn't understand. Julia stepped forward, her pulse quickening. "This is it. This has to be it." But before they could approach the structure, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. The earth cracked open, and a giant form emerged from the depths, a creature of nightmares, a hulking mass of blackened armor and glowing red eyes. It stood taller than any human, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it had been waiting for them. Peter's voice was grim as he spoke, his tone laced with a mixture of fear and determination. "Get back to the shuttle. Now." The ground shook again, more violently this time. The creature, the hulking, nightmarish thing that had risen from the depths, towered over them, its glowing red eyes fixated on the survivors. Every movement of its massive body caused the earth to tremble beneath their feet, and the air was thick with the scent of something ancient, something that had not stirred in millennia. Peter was the first to react. His instincts kicked in. "Move," he shouted, grabbing Julia by the arm and pulling her away from the looming creature. "Get to the shuttle. Go." The survivors scattered, running in every direction as the creature advanced. Julia's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't hesitate. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. If they didn't make it back to the shuttle, they'd be trapped on this hostile planet, at the mercy of the alien forces. Liam was the first to reach the shuttle, his hands trembling as he fumbled to open the hatch. "Come on. Get in." The others were close behind. Julia, Peter, and the rest of the survivors rushed inside, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. As the last one slid into the shuttle, Peter slammed the door shut. He turned to the controls, his hands moving swiftly to activate the engines. The shuttle roared to life, but as they lifted off the ground, the creature let out a deafening roar. A shockwave rocked the shuttle, sending it spiraling into the air. For a moment, it seemed as though they might crash, but Peter fought to regain control, gritting his teeth as the shuttle's engines hummed louder. "Hold on!" Peter yelled, struggling to steady the craft. The creature's massive form seemed to stretch toward them, its red eyes following them with an unblinking, predatory focus. Finally, with one last burst of effort, Peter managed to level the shuttle, pulling it into a steep climb that took them high above the planet's surface. The creature's roar echoed behind them, but they had escaped, barely. As they soared into the night sky, the survivors looked down at the barren world below, their hearts still racing from the close encounter. For a moment, there was silence inside the shuttle as they all tried to process what had just happened. "That thing, it's still following us," Liam whispered, his voice shaky. He was staring out of the shuttle's viewport, his eyes wide with fear. "It's not normal." Peter's jaw tightened as he scanned the horizon, watching for any sign of the creature. "We're not out of the woods yet. Whatever that thing was, it was guarding something down there. Something important." Julia glanced at him, her expression serious. "The structure. It wasn't just a monument. It was a trap." "That's what I'm thinking," Peter replied. "It was waiting for us." "But what for? And what was it guarding?" He looked around at the group, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "We need answers." Liam, still catching his breath, spoke up. "I don't think we're gonna get them unless we go back down there." The suggestion hung in the air, thick with tension. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. The idea of returning to the surface, facing that creature again, was daunting. But deep down, they all knew it had to be done. They had come this far, and they couldn't afford to turn back now. Peter turned to the control panel and began to calculate their course. "We need to find out what's really going on here. We need to go back and explore that structure. But this time, we'll be prepared." The shuttle's engines hummed as it re-entered the atmosphere, descending toward the valley once more. The surface of the planet was bathed in the pale light of the two moons overhead, casting long, eerie shadows over the jagged terrain. The survivors could see the ruins of the massive stone structure in the distance, its silhouette dark against the horizon. As they approached the landing site, Peter keyed in a few commands, guiding the shuttle closer to the ground. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and the temperature had dropped significantly. The planet was a desolate place, a world on the brink of death. "There," Peter said, pointing to the valley where the structure lay. "We'll land closer this time. Keep your eyes peeled." The shuttle touched down softly, its landing gear crunching against the rocky ground. The survivors quickly disembarked, their boots kicking up dust as they made their way toward the structure. The air was still, unnaturally so, and the silence was deafening. "This place, it doesn't feel right," Julia murmured, scanning the surroundings. There was no sign of the creature, no sign of any life at all. Only the ruins of the stone structure, half buried in the earth. Peter nodded, his eyes focused on the building ahead. "We'll stick together. No one strays." They approached the structure cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The strange symbols and glowing runes were still visible, faintly pulsing as though alive, their meanings eluding them. The air around the structure felt charged, as if it were humming with hidden power. As they reached the entrance, Peter motioned for the others to stop. "Wait here," he said. "I'll check it out." He stepped forward, cautiously entering the building. The others followed, their hands on their weapons, ready for anything. The interior of the structure was vast, its walls lined with more of the strange symbols. At the far end of the room, an ancient, metallic door loomed, covered in rust and debris. But it was not the door that caught their attention, it was the enormous object sitting in the center of the room. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. A massive sphere, covered in intricate carvings, stood on a pedestal of stone. The object was pulsing with a soft, blue light, and as they approached, the air around it seemed to grow colder. "What is this?" Julia whispered, her voice barely audible in the silence. Peter didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer to the sphere, his fingers brushing against the surface. A faint hum resonated from the sphere, and for a brief moment, the survivors felt a strange sense of connection to it. As if it was speaking to them, whispering secrets from another time. "Commander," Liam said, his voice urgent. "You might want to." Before he could finish, the sphere suddenly shifted. The ground beneath them rumbled, and the entire structure seemed to come alive. A low, mechanical whirring echoed through the room, and the metallic door at the far end began to open. The survivors jumped back, their weapons drawn. But instead of an enemy, what emerged from the doorway was something far more terrifying. It was an alien, a being like no other. It was humanoid, but its features were sleek and metallic, its skin glistening with an unnatural sheen. Its eyes were a brilliant, glowing blue, and as it stepped into the room, it surveyed the survivors with an expressionless gaze. Julia took a step forward, her weapon still raised. "Who are you? What is this place?" The alien tilted its head, its eyes flickering as if analyzing her words. Then, it spoke, its voice smooth and deep, like an echo reverberating through their minds. "Not what? Who," it said, its voice strange, yet familiar. "You seek answers. You will find them. But at a cost." Peter's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The alien extended a long, slender arm toward the sphere, its fingers grazing the surface. "The heart," it said softly. "The heart of your world. The heart of humanity. The truth is buried beneath the surface. But to uncover it, you must first understand the past." It paused, as if considering something. Then, with a final glance at the survivors, it spoke again. "The secrets you seek will come at a price. You will be tested. But if you succeed, you will unlock the path to your salvation." The chamber fell silent again. The alien, its presence lingering like a heavy fog in the air, had disappeared into the shadows, leaving the survivors staring at the glowing sphere at the center of the room. Their weapons were still raised, but the immediate danger had passed, at least for the moment. Yet, a new kind of danger had emerged, one far more insidious. The kind that twisted the mind, making every decision feel like a matter of life and death. Peter's heart was pounding in his chest as he surveyed the room. The presence of the alien had been enough to unnerve even him, a seasoned soldier with years of combat experience. But now, there was something else, something much more dangerous. "Commander," Julia said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "What do we do now?" Peter shook his head slowly, his mind racing as he tried to process everything that had happened. "I don't know, Julia. But we need answers. We can't leave here without understanding what that thing was talking about. It said we needed to understand the past." "What past? And why was it warning us?" Liam, still on edge, glanced nervously toward the now darkened doorway where the alien had vanished. "Maybe it's not the past we need to understand. Maybe it's the future." He swallowed hard, glancing at the glowing sphere once again. This thing, it feels wrong." Julia nodded. "That's the problem. Nothing about this feels right. But we don't have a choice. If that alien was right, then this sphere, this thing, could be the key to saving humanity. If it's even real. We've come this far, and I don't plan on turning back now." Peter looked at each of them, his expression grim. They had all faced death countless times over the course of their journey. But this was different. The alien had spoken of tests, of a price to pay. None of them knew what that meant, but they couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear. "We stick together," Peter said, his voice low but determined. "We find out what's inside this structure, and we do it carefully. No one strays. Understood?" The others nodded in unison, but even as they moved forward, there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. They were all walking into the unknown, and no matter how much they had prepared for this moment, they were still uncertain of what lay ahead. The survivors approached the sphere cautiously, their eyes fixed on its pulsating glow. It was beautiful in an almost hypnotic way, but its beauty was deceiving. Peter could feel the weight of its power. There was something ancient, something far beyond their understanding, contained within this object. Julia stepped forward, her hand outstretched, and for a moment, it seemed like she might touch the sphere. But Peter quickly grabbed her wrist, pulling her back. "No. We don't know what this thing is capable of," he said firmly. "We need to think this through." "I know," Julia muttered, "but it's calling to me. I can feel it." Peter's gaze softened for a moment. "I understand. But if we're going to survive this, we need to be smart about it." They circled the sphere, examining its surface closely. The intricate carvings and symbols that adorned it seemed to shift and change, as though they were alive, responding to their presence. But no matter how closely they looked, the symbols didn't seem to offer any immediate answers. Liam, his face pale, stepped up beside Peter. "This thing, it feels like it's waiting for something." Peter looked at him, his brow furrowed. "It's not just waiting. It's testing us. The alien said something about a price. We don't know what that means, but whatever happens next, we have to be ready." A sudden, sharp hum filled the air, and the survivors froze. The sphere began to vibrate, its glow intensifying. The ground beneath them trembled as though some massive force was awakening deep below the surface. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse in time with the sphere, and for a moment, it felt as if the very structure itself was alive. Then, without warning, a series of deep cracks appeared in the floor, spreading outward like veins of lightning. The survivors stumbled backward, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. The air grew colder, and the hum of the sphere became deafening. Peter's voice was barely audible over the noise. "What the hell is happening?" Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them buckled, and the entire structure began to shift. Massive gears and cogs, hidden beneath the surface, ground into motion, pulling the walls apart and revealing a hidden staircase that led deep into the earth. The light from the sphere illuminated the stairwell, casting long shadows into the darkness below. "Is that," Liam began, his voice filled with awe and fear. "Is that where we're supposed to go?" Julia looked to Peter. "We have no choice now. The sphere opened that passage for a reason. We're being forced to go down." Peter hesitated for a moment, but the urgency of the situation left him with little time for second-guessing. "Let's move. We stick together. No one gets separated." The survivors made their way down the staircase, their boots echoing in the dark, the only light coming from the pulsing glow of the sphere above them. The deeper they descended, the colder it became, and the more oppressive the air felt. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on them, pressing down on their shoulders. As they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a vast cavern, the size of a stadium, its walls covered in more of the same strange symbols they had seen in the ship and on the sphere. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay hung in the air. This place, whatever it was, had not been touched by time, and yet, it felt like it had been waiting for centuries to be discovered. The survivors spread out, their eyes scanning every corner of the cavern. And then, they saw it. In the center of the room was a massive stone platform, and atop it lay an object, its shape obscured by shadows. But even from a distance, they could tell it was important. "That's it," Peter said, his voice hoarse. "That's what we're here for." But as they moved closer, the ground shook again. A rumbling sound filled the cavern, and the survivors spun around, their weapons raised, expecting another attack. But what they saw was far worse. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, towering over them with glowing red eyes. Its body was encased in a dark, metallic armor, and it moved with a terrifying grace. The figure was humanoid, but it was anything but human. It was an alien, a being of pure power, and it was not alone. Behind it, another figure stepped forward, then another, and another. The survivors were surrounded. The figures moved like shadows, their steps silent and swift. There were at least 5 of them, each one taller and more menacing than the last. Who are they? Julia whispered, her voice barely audible. Peter didn't answer. His mind was working furiously, analyzing their every move. These beings weren't like the alien they had encountered earlier. They were different, darker, more powerful. They radiated an aura of ancient knowledge, and Peter had the distinct feeling that they were far beyond anything humanity could comprehend. One of the figures stepped forward, its eyes glowing brighter than the others. It was the largest of the group, its body gleaming with a black, metallic sheen. It raised its hand, and the survivors froze, unable to move, as if an invisible force had gripped them. "You have come for the heart," the figure said, its voice booming in their minds. "But you are not ready." Peter tried to move, but his body was paralyzed. The others were in the same state, unable to speak or act. The alien's presence was overwhelming, and it felt as if the very air had turned to lead. "You seek knowledge," the alien continued, its voice cold and unyielding. "But knowledge comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Peter opened his mouth, but no words came out. The alien seemed to sense his resistance, and its eyes narrowed. "You are not worthy," the alien said, its voice dripping with disdain. "Not yet." And then, with a sudden flash of light, the aliens vanished, leaving the survivors standing alone in the cavern, their limbs still frozen. The ground trembled beneath them as the last of the alien figures vanished into the shadows. The cavern was once again quiet, save for the faint hum of energy that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The survivors stood frozen, their minds reeling from what they had just experienced. Peter's heart was pounding in his chest. His hands trembled, and his breath came in short bursts, but he couldn't afford to panic. He had led his team through countless dangers, but this was something else. The alien beings they had encountered were not simply invaders, they were ancient, powerful entities who had existed far beyond human comprehension. And they had just told him that humanity was not ready for what lay ahead. "Peter?" Julia's voice broke through the silence, and he turned to look at her. Her face was pale, but there was determination in her eyes. She was holding herself together, but Peter could see the same fear that gripped him reflected in her gaze. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice tight with the weight of the question. Peter swallowed hard. He wanted to give her a clear answer, a plan, something solid to hold on to, but he couldn't. The truth was, he didn't know. He had hoped that finding the heart, the source of whatever power lay beneath the surface of this planet, would give them the answers they needed to save humanity. But now, it felt like they were standing at the precipice of something far more dangerous. "We can't turn back," Peter said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "We've come this far. We have to see this through." Liam, who had been standing by silently, his eyes scanning the cavern, finally spoke up. "But what are we really fighting for, Peter? Is this salvation? Or are we just walking into our graves?" Julia glanced at him, but it was Peter who answered. "We're fighting for a future. For humanity's future." He paused, glancing at the rising platform in the center of the cavern. "This, whatever it is, it's the key. It has to be." But deep inside, Peter felt the weight of Liam's words. Was this truly salvation, or was it a trap? Was this journey, this struggle, all for nothing? The stone platform in the center of the room had slowly begun to rise, revealing a massive, glowing artifact beneath it. The artifact radiated an eerie light, filling the cavern with a soft, pulsating glow. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic in its intensity, but Peter knew better than to be entranced by its beauty. This was not just a piece of technology, it was something far greater. It held the power to change everything. But at what cost? Julia, sensing the gravity of the situation, stepped forward. "We can't wait any longer. If we don't make a decision now, the aliens will come back. And next time, we might not be so lucky." Peter nodded, his gaze still fixed on the artifact. "I know. But this isn't just about us anymore. This is about all of humanity. We have to unlock its secrets, whatever they are. The others moved forward cautiously, but there was a palpable sense of unease. Each step they took toward the glowing artifact felt like a step into the unknown, and none of them knew what awaited them when they got there. As they reached the platform, Peter hesitated. He could feel the pull of the artifact, its energy vibrating through the air. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before. The same hum that had filled the chamber when the alien figures appeared was now resonating from the artifact itself, a low, resonant sound that seemed to speak directly to his soul. "This is it," Peter said, more to himself than to anyone else. "This is what we came for." Without another word, he stepped forward and placed his hand on the artifact. The moment his fingers made contact, the cavern seemed to come alive. The lights intensified, the hum grew louder, and the air around them crackled with raw energy. The walls of the cavern began to shift, revealing vast murals carved into the stone, depicting scenes of ancient civilizations, strange beings, star systems, and worlds beyond their own. The survivors gasped in awe as the murals seemed to come to life, the figures on the walls moving as if they were trapped in time. Peter's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the images. Some of them were familiar, their solar system, their own history. But others were alien, utterly foreign. There were beings that resembled the creatures they had encountered earlier, and others that seemed even more incomprehensible. The hum of the artifact reached a crescendo, and suddenly, everything stopped. The chamber fell silent. The glowing light of the artifact dimmed, and a voice echoed through the cavern. It was the same voice they had heard before, the alien voice, deep and resonant. "You seek answers," it said, its tone calm but filled with a sense of inevitability. "But are you ready for the truth?" Peter's heart raced. The voice spoke of the truth. But what truth? What was the artifact, and why had it brought them here? He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the voice continued. "The truth is not without its cost," it said. "You have come to the heart of this world, the heart of your own existence. What you learn here will shape the future of your species. But the path you choose will determine whether humanity survives, or whether it ceases to exist." The survivors stood motionless, the weight of the voice's words pressing down on them. Peter felt a cold chill run down his spine. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. But it was not a moment of triumph. It was a moment of reckoning. "Are you willing to make the sacrifice?" the voice asked. Peter closed his eyes, his mind spinning. The aliens, the creatures they had encountered, were not just invaders, they were guardians, protectors of something far greater than Earth. The sphere, the artifact, the ancient structure, it was all part of something much larger, something beyond their understanding. Julia's voice cut through the silence. "What do you mean? What sacrifice?" The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, the ground beneath them shook again, and the entire cavern seemed to tremble with energy. Then, in a flash of light, the survivors were transported to a new place. They found themselves standing on the edge of a vast, alien city. The architecture was unlike anything they had ever seen, towering spires made of materials that shimmered like liquid metal, and structures that seemed to pulse with light. The sky above was a deep shade of purple, and strange, glowing patterns danced across the surface of the planet. "This is the truth," the voice said, its presence surrounding them. "This city, this civilization, was once yours. Long before humanity existed on Earth, your ancestors lived here, on this world. You were the first to travel the stars, to explore the galaxies. But you were not alone." Peter's mind reeled as he looked around at the alien city. The structures were ancient, and yet they seemed to vibrate with a strange, almost familiar energy. The voice spoke again, and Peter's heart sank. "The aliens you now face are not invaders. They are your kin, your ancestors, sent to protect what was left behind. The truth you seek is not knowledge, it is responsibility. You are the descendants of a great civilization, one that shaped the galaxy. But your actions, your choices, have led to this moment. Peter clenched his fists. What do you want from us? The voice was silent for a moment, and then it spoke again, softer this time. To protect this world, to protect the legacy of your ancestors, you must make a choice. You can leave, return to your home and live out your lives in peace. Or you can stay and assume the mantle of your ancestors, taking up the responsibility of guiding the galaxy. But there is no going back. If you choose to stay, you will become part of this legacy. And you will be changed. Peter's mind raced as he processed the enormity of what the voice was saying. This wasn't just about humanity's survival. This was about choosing a new path, a new role in the galaxy. The choice was his, and it would change everything. The city around them was collapsing, disintegrating before their eyes. Towers of alien metal twisted and crumbled, falling into the void as the strange patterns in the sky flickered and disappeared. It was as though the world was unraveling, a once great civilization collapsing under the weight of time and forgotten history. The survivors stood frozen, unable to comprehend the full scope of what had just been revealed to them. Peter's heart raced as he looked around at the alien landscape, the once imposing city now fading into nothingness. The hum of energy that had filled the air had died down, and an eerie silence had descended over the ruins. The voice, the ancient, omnipotent voice that had guided them thus far, spoke again, reverberating in their minds like a distant echo. You stand at the crossroads of destiny, the voice said, its tone now strangely calm. The path you choose will not only determine the future of your species but also the future of the galaxy. Peter's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment that would shape the destiny of humanity. The voice had already told them what was at stake. If they chose to stay, they would become part of the ancient civilization that had once thrived here. They would assume the mantle of their ancestors and guide the galaxy, becoming more than human. But the price was steep. If they stayed, they would change. They would no longer be the people they had once been. He turned to the others, their faces illuminated by the dying light of the city. Julia stood next to him, her expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Liam was beside her, his jaw clenched in thought. While the rest of the survivors stood in quiet contemplation. What do we do now? Julia asked, her voice soft but filled with resolve. Her eyes searched Peter's, as if looking for guidance. Peter swallowed hard. The weight of the decision hung heavily on his shoulders. The truth of their existence, their true origin, had been revealed to them. They were not simply survivors of a dying world. They were the descendants of an ancient race, one that had once ruled the stars. And now, they were faced with the decision of whether to embrace their heritage or return to the ashes of their own civilization. The voice said we could leave, Liam spoke up, his voice hoarse. That we could go back to Earth and live out our lives in peace. Peter nodded, his eyes drifting to the crumbling remnants of the alien city. We could. We could walk away from all this and start over. But, what would we be going back to? Earth is lost. Humanity is on the brink of extinction. Julia's eyes flickered with uncertainty. But if we stay, we will change. We'll become something else. We'll become part of a galaxy we don't even understand. Peter sighed, his mind filled with conflicting thoughts. The alien voice had offered them a choice, peace or power. But both came with a price. Staying meant leaving behind everything they knew, becoming something entirely different, and possibly losing their humanity in the process. But leaving meant returning to a dying world, to a civilization that was on the brink of extinction. The truth was undeniable, Earth had fallen. The alien invaders had nearly wiped them out, and now, it seemed that the remnants of humanity were the last hope. But what kind of hope could they offer? Would embracing their ancestral legacy mean salvation, or would it mean the end of humanity as they knew it? Perhaps we don't have to choose, Julia said suddenly, her voice thoughtful. Maybe there's a way to take the best of both paths. We can learn from the past without completely losing ourselves. We don't have to abandon humanity. We can build something new. Peter looked at her, surprised by her words. He had been so consumed by the weight of the decision, so focused on the dichotomy of peace versus power, that he hadn't considered this option. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tentative. Julia took a deep breath. "We can preserve our humanity. We can take the knowledge and power that the aliens have given us, but we don't have to become them. We can use this new power to rebuild Earth, to start anew, and to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past." Peter considered her words carefully. Could it really be that simple? Could they reclaim their heritage without losing what made them human? Was there a way to balance the ancient knowledge with their need for survival? "I don't know if that's possible," Peter said slowly, "but it's worth trying." Liam stepped forward, his expression hardening. "We can't afford to be divided now. The aliens are right about one thing: we're at a crossroads. If we leave, humanity might have a chance to survive. But if we stay, we'll have to take responsibility for the galaxy. And that means making choices that will affect more than just Earth." Peter nodded grimly. "That's true. But we can't make this decision lightly. We need to think about the future, not just for us, but for all of humanity." The survivors stood together in silence, each one of them struggling with the enormity of the decision. The ancient alien civilization had offered them the opportunity to rise above their human limitations, to become something greater. But at what cost? Would they lose everything that made them human? Or could they forge a new path, one that honored their heritage without abandoning their humanity? After what felt like an eternity, Peter turned to face the center of the crumbling city. The artifact, the source of the ancient power, was still glowing faintly, its light casting long shadows across the ruins. He knew that this was their last chance to make a decision. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his resolve hardening. The others followed him, each of them moving with a sense of purpose. "We don't have all the answers," Peter said, his voice strong. "But we're the last humans. If we don't try, we'll lose everything. We may not know what lies ahead, but we have to keep moving forward. Together." As he spoke, the glowing artifact began to pulse more brightly, its energy building as if it was responding to his words. The light grew brighter, more intense, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire galaxy was converging on this one moment. The voice of the ancient alien appeared again, this time more forceful, almost pleading. "Make your choice," it said. "If you choose to stay, you will become one with the legacy of your ancestors. But know this, the power you seek comes at a cost. The universe will change, and so will you. Do not take this decision lightly." Peter turned to the others, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this was the moment. There would be no turning back. "We can't just accept power blindly," Peter said. "But we can choose to rebuild, to honor what came before us while forging a new future. We can keep our humanity while embracing the responsibility we were born to carry." With that, Peter stepped forward and placed his hand on the artifact. The others followed suit, one by one, each of them touching the glowing surface. As they did, the energy from the artifact surged through them, filling them with knowledge, ancient, profound knowledge of the universe and its secrets. The cavern trembled, and the alien city began to fade completely, its structures dissolving into the ether. But the survivors remained, standing strong, connected to the power of their ancestors and the promise of a new future. The voice spoke one last time. "Your choice has been made. The future is yours to shape. Be the stewards of this world. Be the light in the darkness. Your journey has just begun." Epilogue. The survivors returned to Earth, bringing with them the knowledge and power of the ancient civilization that had once ruled the stars. They rebuilt, not just humanity, but the very foundations of civilization itself. They became the stewards of the Earth and the galaxy, using their newfound power to guide the future of all sentient life. Though they were forever changed by their experiences, they remained human, flawed, capable of love, hope, and growth. And in the end, that was what mattered most. The lesson they learned was simple: the true power of humanity lies not in its ability to conquer, but in its ability to adapt, to learn, and to evolve. And so, the last humans became the first to step into a new era, one of peace, exploration, and responsibility.